enhancing genes. And to final few slides, I'll also share what I could conclude from all these developments and what are all the future prospects in the area of molecular breeding. Remember, there is no perfect, this is not a textbook lecture, or it's not a lecture wherein I'll be talking about a perfect path for molecular breeding. I'll be talking about both the prospects and also pitfalls in this particular area of research. So let me go into the first topic, a subtopic I'll be presenting, the threat of climate change and possible solutions for it. One of the major challenges for ensuring food and nutritional security is our increasing population, wherein by 2025, we'll be adding additionally 1.75 billion additional bellies. And we need to produce additional cereals, particularly in terms of rice, at least about 30% more rice in the another 5 to 6 years. And this additional 30% requirement will be coming, more than 85% will be coming, requirement will be coming from the developing nations, and 15% will be from developed nations. So what are all the challenges to meet this particular food and nutritional security requirement? One is, of course, climate change, wherein because of release of greenhouse gases and other industrial activities, it is expected that temperature will certainly increase in due course. And what we are expecting is, because of this change in climate, if we don't do any intervention, for example, the demand is given here in the green color line, wherein the demand for food production is going to increase, steadily increase, may stabilize by 2050. But if there is no change in climate, probably we'll be able to meet this particular demand. So in this particular situation, with changing climate, certainly our food productions are going to drop. With some minor interventions, probably we'll be able to meet some or majority part of this particular target. So what is the role of rice related to climate change? It has been estimated, even though there are some conflicting reports, rice alone contributes, due to methane emission in wetlands, to 23% of all the contributing factors of climate change. And what will be the impact of climate change? It can be expected that by another, by 2050, average surface temperatures will certainly increase at least by 2 degrees centigrade, if not by 3 or 4 degrees centigrade. Because of this increasing temperature, there will be marginal changes in monsoon months, but there will be a lot of changes in non-monsoon months, and the number of rainy days will set to decrease by more than 15 days. As on today, rainy days extend from the July to August or September, but there will be certain decrease in number of rainy days by at least 15 days, and the intensity of rains will increase by 1 to 4 millimeter per day in the rainy days. What is the consequence of it? The consequence is that there will be an increase in frequency and intensity of cyclonic storms. We have already seen a set of cyclones and super cyclones hitting the east and west coast, including the recent super cyclone which hit Bengal. These are all consequences of a rapidly changing climate. And what will be the impact of climate change in agriculture, or more importantly, with respect to, particularly with respect to rice yields? One of the important factors what we need to see is an average 2 degrees centigrade in increase in mean air temperature. Rice yields could decrease as much as about 0.75 or 1 tons per hectare. And this is true in very high yielding areas wherein climate change or increasing temperature will have a major effect. And it will also insignificantly reduce food production in low yield or coastal regions. And major impacts of climate change will be on rain-fed crops, which is practiced by poorest of poor farmers. So what will be the loss of net farm revenue is, it will be between anywhere between 9 to 25% if we don't take sufficient steps to tackle the rapidly changing climate, and then make more changes or modifications in the way we do rice breeding or we do crop improvement. And another important factor which is not coming to prominence is that several studies have shown that there will be a change in pattern of pests and diseases, particularly in rice crop and also with respect to abiotic stresses because of change or increase in surface temperature. These may also reduce rice yield significantly. Several surveys have shown that a change in pest and disease pattern alone will decrease rice production by at least 5 to 15% in the coming years if we don't take adequate steps to improve or modify our crop production crop improvement technologies. Now coming to the different tools available to us to tackle or minimize the effect of climate change and then ensure food and nutrition security. One of the important tools wherein I have been contributing actively is marker-assisted breeding. This is one particular tool wherein we are not making gross changes in the genome, but through a natural process, that is by hybridization or crossbreeding with the help of molecular markers. And of course, another very powerful tool is genetic engineering, about which Dr. Kutubuddin Mollat already spoke to you. Genetic engineering also includes the modern tools of genome editing, and it can also bring in a lot of changes in the way we can produce crops. And of course, another important tool is genomics, wherein a lot of developments we have seen in the recent years. You must have already heard an excellent talk by Dr. Bharadwaj, wherein he highlighted the role where genomics can play in terms of chickpea improvement. And similar developments are also occurring in several crops. And the power of genomics is such that it can make significant changes or improvements, not only in molecular breeding, but also in the way we do genetic engineering. So let me move into a very brief introduction about what are DNA markers and what is molecular breeding. So if we see the genetic material, it lies in the nucleus in terms of chromosome. And then what are chromosomes? These are long coils of DNA. So molecular marker in simple terms is a flag post or a signpost which is lying near the gene of interest. And an important thing with the advent of the tools of genomics and also the developments related to genomics, we are getting a lot of markers which are part of the genes. These markers are called as functional markers. Remember, the one which is highlighted in purple flag are called as functional markers. They are part of the gene, while link markers can be successful or fail, also be failures, because they depend on how close or how far these markers are with respect to the genes. Functional markers will always be successful in many crops, including rice, tomato, cotton, sorghum, maize, and various pulses like chickpea, PG, and pea. Now that we have got the complete or near complete genome sequences, most of the markers that are being deployed are functional markers. So through this particular slide, what I would like to say is a simple scheme for marker-assisted selection. You have two varieties, parent 1 and then parent 2. Parent 1 is high yielding but susceptible to a particular disease, and parent 2 is low yielding but is resistant to a particular disease. How can we combine these two traits? For example, for the gene of interest, we have a molecular marker. Here I have demonstrated a PCR-based marker wherein you get a higher molecular weight fragment if it is a susceptible allele and a lower molecular weight fragment if it is a resistant allele. So you make a cross, develop F1s and then sell them. So in F2 generation, we'll be having large population consisting of thousands of plants. So what will be the allelic status? An F2 plant can be homozygous for the susceptible allele or homozygous for the resistant allele, or it can be heterozygous. So among these thousands of plants, select few of the plants which are homozygous for the resistant allele and then select them for yield and other related traits which come from both the parents. This is a very simplified scheme for marker-assisted breeding, and this is shortly can also be called as improvement of economically important traits through indirect selection based on DNA-based markers, which have been mostly PCR-based markers till date. Of late, we have also started using a new set of markers which have come because of development in genomics called as single nucleotide markers. So these markers will either be linked to the gene of interest or which will be part of the target genes. This whole process of application of markers in the process of breeding is called as molecular breeding. How has molecular breeding made a lot of difference in the process of breeding. Dr. Bharadwaj has already quoted very good examples in chickpea breeding, wherein various traits like drought tolerance, disease resistance, it's possible to now combine into the background of elite cultivars. Similar is the case with rice. Consider that this is elite cultivar, for example, a very good basmati cultivar, which is pest and disease susceptible. So if you want to transfer from a donor parent, say resistance against diseases like bacterial blight, blast, and resistance against insect pests like gallmage and then BPH, it will not be or theoretically impossible to combine all these traits in the background of the basmati variety without involvement of molecular biology or biotechnology. It will not be possible through conventional breeding. It takes several generations of crossing and intercrossing. But with the advent of molecular breeding, if you have a marker linked to all these genes, based on selection through markers, we can transfer these genes individually through backcross breeding or marker-sted backcross breeding into the background of this basmati cultivar individually, and then through intercrossing of the backcross derived lines, we can transfer all the set of genes theoretically in a time period of 6 to 8 years very efficiently. And this has been demonstrated by several research groups, including International Rice Research Institute, our own group here in IARR, and also by Indian Agriculture Research Institute, TNAU, and also Indira Gandhi Agriculture University. So the possibilities are plenty as far as molecular breeding is concerned. And in this regard, I would also like to mention that molecular breeding can also supplement transgenic breeding once a genetic engineer transfer a particular trait of interest to a variety. It could be an inferior variety or a superior variety. Through marker-sted breeding, it can be transferred to a lot of other varieties through simple marker-sted breeding, either through backcross breeding or pedigree breeding approach. And what does molecular breeding do? It significantly helps to reduce down the time taken for breeding. This particular breeding funnel is very much evident. For example, in traditional breeding, anywhere between 4 to 5 years it takes to develop a variety which can be nominated for breeding trials. The same set of varieties can be developed within 2 or 3 years through molecular breeding. And this will be evident from one particular case study, development of improved Samba Masuri, wherein we have shown that within a time period of about 2.5 or 3 years, products will be ready for testing. So now let's try to see how molecular markers or molecular breeding can be helpful to develop or add new traits into rice. Remember, one important point what you need to know here is molecular breeding can be helpful only to transfer already existing traits. Say, for example, traits like bacterial blight resistance, traits like blast resistance. You cannot do any manipulation through molecular breeding if genetic variation for that particular trait is not available in the primary rice germplasm. For such traits, transgenic breeding or genetic engineering is the only solution. So with this introduction, I would like to talk or discuss more about how we were able to add an important trait, bacterial blight resistance, into the background of a very popular variety called Samba Masuri. So before giving an introduction to bacterial blight, I would just like to mention about the importance of biotic stress resistance, how they are a threat to both food and nutritional security, particularly with respect to rice. It has been estimated by several studies that on an average every year, biotic stresses limit rice yields anywhere between 25 to 30%. For example, this year the rice production has been about 116 million tons. We could have produced at least about 130 or 135 million tons, but because of biotic stresses, this particular yield, what we obtained is only 116 or 117 million tons. If you look into what all the insect pests which are affecting rice production, they are stem borer, leaf folder, brown plant hopper, and then gallmage. And as far as diseases are concerned, they are multivarious. They include blast, bacterial blight, leaf blight. So you may be thinking, why have put something like stem borer or sheet blight or leaf folder or rice tumor virus in red color? This is principally because as on date, we don't have a clear-cut solution in terms of availability of resistant sources or tolerant sources in the rice germplasm. What we have is moderately tolerant or moderately susceptible entries. And if a breeder has to manipulate traits like stem borer or leaf folder resistance or sheet blight tolerance, he has to go for transgenic breeding or genetic engineering. As far as blast, bacterial blight, and BPH and gallmage are concerned, there are sufficient solutions available in both primary and secondary germplasm of rice, which a breeder can exploit and then transfer resistance through macro-resistant breeding or molecular breeding. One of the important part with regard to resistant breeding, whether it is for a brown plant hopper, blast or bacterial leaf blight resistance, it has been only partially successful. Initially, with the advent of green revolution, most of the varieties that were released later had a single resistant gene, but what we are seeing is even many popular varieties like Swarna, which has been released as resistant or tolerant to bacterial leaf blight, the resistance levels are broken down. This is primarily because of rapidly changing climate, wherein we are seeing that there is a evolution of virulent biotypes or pathotypes of pests and pathogens, and we need to identify a set of genes, at least 2 or 3 resistant genes, into the background of elite rice varieties. This selection will be dependent on which areas the rice varieties will be grown, and then they are to be deployed as gene pyramids or gene combinations or gene stacks. So coming to the problem of bacterial blight, this is a major disease caused by a bacterium called Xanthomonas varaceae PV varaceae. A sister or related strain called as Xanthomonas varaceae PV varaceae color causes another disease, a minor disease called as bacterial leaf streak. But what is important to know is that even diseases like bacterial leaf streak, because of its rapidly changing climate, it is increasing in its incidence. And as far as bacterial blight is concerned, as I told you, it can cause anywhere between 10 to 30% minimum damage, mainly in the irrigated and lowland ecologies. You don't get much of area in upland conditions or in areas where rice is grown under less water or under less irrigation. Most of the bacterial blight endemic areas are all irrigated areas and then rain-fed lowland ecologies. What is important to note is that management of the disease can be possible only through resistance breeding. Till date, no effective chemical control agents or antibiotics are available for low-cost management of this disease. So as on date, resistance breeding is the only option. Fortunately, we have at least 45 resistant genes available in our repertoire, and most of these genes are already there in the background of IR24 rice variety. These are called as IRBB lines. IRRI and other related research groups have developed at least 60 or 70 IRBB varieties having different single resistant genes and then resistant gene combinations. I have already told you that single resistant genes will not be effective for deployment across the country. And what is important to note is that as on date in India, we have at least 22 pathotypes of the pathogen, which are prevalent in most of the rice growing states in the country. And we need to identify what strain is there. For example, if I have to develop bacterial blight resistant rice varieties from West Bengal, before selecting the resistant genes and also their donors, I need to make an assessment. What is the predominant or prevalent pathotype in that particular location? And what are all the effective resistant genes which can work against that particular pathotype? This assessment before starting the resistant breeding program is important. So when I joined IRR way back in 1998, that time also, and even as on today also, Samba Masuri along with other varieties like Swarna and NTU1010, they were the ruling varieties. Samba Masuri had a unique property in the sense that it has excellent cooking and eating quality, and it also has a very high milling recovery, as high as 65 or 70%. So because of this particular reason, there is an enormous area in the states of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh which is under cultivation of this variety. But one of the major problems which farmers expressed at that point of time is it is highly susceptible to bacterial blight among other diseases. So at least for bacterial blight, since IRR and other institutes had developed set of resistant varieties, they wanted some solution for bacterial blight. So this is the extent to which this particular disease, bacterial blight, affects Samba Masuri. As you can see, when the disease occurs in a severe endemic form or in severe conditions, you will get few grains and they will also be very chaffy. So it also not only affects the yield, but also the grain quality. So before we had decided that Samba Masuri is the candidate for bacterial blight resistance, but we had a series of questions when we started this breeding program or molecular breeding program. So we wanted to know what is the genetic diversity within the population of exo strains in India. As on date, we clearly know that at least 22 pathotypes exist, But when we started this particular breeding program, we were not sure how much is the extent of genetic diversity within the strains of Xanthomonas veraceae. And we also wanted to know, based on the genetic diversity within the population of Exo strains, what are all the rice-resistant genes that can be effective against Indian strains of Exo. And then the third question we asked ourselves is, what could be the donor genotypes possessing all the suitable R genes which can be deployed for transfer to Samba Masuri. So we tried to answer each of these three questions scientifically. So the first questions were answer for the first questions emerged way back in 1996-97 itself, wherein even before I joined IARR, a group of scientists from IARR, including Dr. Laha, Dr. APK Reddy, along with scientists from CCMB, they worked on DNA fingerprinting and then pathotyping analysis. So this analysis revealed that there are two major groups of two pathotypes existing in the year 1997. Among these, group 1 was identified to be predominant. Then what we did is, we had a series of IRBB lines. I had explained to you earlier that IRBB lines are the lines in the background of the variety IR24 carrying single resistant genes or multiple resistant genes. So we had at that point of time a set of IRBB lines like IRBB3, IRBB4, IRBB5, 7, 13, and 21. We checked whether how many of these genes are effective against Xanthomonas isolates belong to group 1 and group 2. From this particular slide, it's very clear that XA13 and XA21 give very strong level of resistance against both group 1 and group 2. Then we also asked a question whether XA5 will be effective or not. Even though XA7 was showing strong resistance to group 2, but it was occurring only sporadically in a few areas. We thought that whatever that will be effective, either moderate resistant or moderate susceptibility against group 1 will be effective. So what we decided at that point of time is that rather than deploying XA13 and 21, we would add another gene called XA5. Even though it may delay the breeding process or the breeding time, we thought that it will be very good to deploy. In the hindsight, I would say that we are right, because there are many different rice varieties wherein only XA20, 21 and 13 have been deployed. We are seeing that there are many races of pathogen which can break down the resistance conferred by XA. So we have answered the question. We know that XA21 and 30 could be effective for deployment in Samba Masuri. So we had at that point of time all these three genes in the background of IR24. But when we grew that particular donor line called IRBB56, there was one problem with IRBB56. Unlike IR24, it was not very high yielding, and then it had other agromorphological deficiencies also. So what we did is that we, at the point of time, those are the days of free exchange of material, germplasm, donor lines and all. So at that point of time, Dr. Sukhvinder's group in Punjab Agriculture University, Ludhiana, he had developed a rice line called as SS1113, which was in varietal trials at the point of time in Punjab. This had XA21, 13 and 5 in the background of a very popular variety called PR106, which is also of shorter duration and with reasonably good grain type and also with good agromorphological traits. Even though it was lower than improved Samba Masuri in terms of other traits like grain and quality, but still it had a good potential to be used as a donor. So we used this particular line SS1113, which was in the background of a very popular Punjab variety called PR106 as the donor, and we didn't use donor line in the background of IR24. Then in collaboration with CCMB, this particular program was coordinated by Dr. Ramesh Sonti, and from IARR,